What's good, big girls? Welcome back into the BDGE Dynasty channel. My name's Adam. If you're new to the channel, make sure you go down and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content that we're bringing to you here weekly on the game of Dynasty. Now, today what I want to get into you with, kind of discussing some things that we're going to start offering here pretty soon at BDGE. I've been doing some in the past, and I've had someone come to me actually recently in an email, reach out to me on the side, basically asking for something a little more customized. What is going to be called a portfolio review. So he has 21 leagues that he's in Dynasty, and he wants me to take a look at all the teams. Now, in the team review, get a little more in-depth and kind of go through all the different settings in the leagues, as well as your team individually compared to all the different teams in the leagues. And I go through kind of with a fine-tooth comb, going over everything in your league settings, currently as you have your team kind of assembled, the roster construction, etc., to make sure you're in the best position to go eat in your league. The portfolio review is kind of a little more quick and dirty, if you want to call it like that, right? Where I'm going to be looking at some of the main things like roster construction and kind of the main points that I think are important across all your different leagues, and then kind of narrowing it down depending on in your portfolio what kind of scoring setting differences you have. If you have some really weird league settings like crazy number of roster spots or crazy number of starters, super shallow if you're in like an 8 format where you're starting like 8 and you get really shallow with the starters, or you're in like a 14, 16 team league. A lot of these different things can change kind of the way that I'm going to approach each one of those leagues in the way that I roster construct, the way that I'm building my team, and kind of how I'm trying to utilize my assets relative to the league. So today what I'm going to get into you with here is in Zach Willard's portfolio, what I'm going to do actually for him, a little bonus, and because I'm able to make content out of it, of the 21 leagues that he's in, I'm going to kind of give you one of them today where it's going to be close to a full team review, not quite, but kind of giving you the basics, running it through for you to see kind of how I would do a team review. Next week or sometime down the road, shortly after this, I'm going to go ahead and kind of show you what I'm doing with the other leagues that he's in, kind of showing you the portfolio review. But before we get into the details of that, you already know what we got to do. Let's tuck them, man. Tuck them damn shirts in. Stop yapping. It's time to eat. All right, so let's get straight into this here. And we take a look, when I'm looking at this as a team review, right? I'm looking at Zach Willard's team in this league. Kind of what I want to start with is see, obviously, how many teams are in the league, but just overall the league settings. So what I have from Zach on this league here, we're looking at a 12-team league. We got start 12. It's a super flex league, so you're starting optimally 2 quarterbacks. Realistically, you should never be starting a non-quarterback in the super flex spot unless you're desperate. We got a full PPR, heavy tight end premium in this one, and a total roster of 30 spots. So that's kind of the settings, kind of give me just an idea of what we're working with here when I'm looking at your league versus, all the other different types of settings you can have. I want to know all the specifics there. So then the second thing I'm going to do once I know that now, right, and I take a look at Zach's team in this league, the league name is called Auctionauts. So now that I know his sleeper ID and the fact that the league is Auctionauts, I'm going to go ahead and plug into the Worp tool, southharmonff.com/Worp. Not saying you have to get the Worp tool, but for me, this is one of the cruxes of how I start really assessing my team in the league settings, and essentially how I want to appropriate the way that I value certain positions, right? This is kind of just positions versus positions, understanding a lot of different things from the Worp chart that we look at. So when I take a look at the Worp on this league for Zach, multi-year Worp kind of shows me a few things. Obviously the line at the top there, the blue line, showing that receivers kind of have a chance to not only be the top scorers in the league, but as it continues to kind of round out and we go down the chart, actually right even here at 12. So wide receiver 12, that position, like the wide receiver 12 is beating all the other RB 12, quarterback 12, and then the tight end 12 obviously as well. One of the things I'm seeing here, right, when I look at the running back position is running backs in general, I say, we kind of value them a lot differently currently in this landscape than we have in years past. So I don't want to put too much emphasis as far as my overall dynasty value into the running back position in most leagues in here. I'm not going to say it's a lot different, but I will say this. If I have a chance to get into, when I look at a Worp line like this where, there's 3 running backs that are over 3 Worp in this league. So when I look at that upper left quadrant, right, that basically showing me that the hammer type running backs that aren't just Christian McCaffrey are massively helpful, and they're hammers. They're literally part of the players that are winning you leagues. And then there's also, we got 6 that are at basically 2.5 when I look at this. So, and then even as you get down to 12, we're at 2 Worp. These are massively meaningful players. And the fact that we are starting 12 players is a lot of the reason why. Basically, you have to start as many skill players as possible, realistically, in a 12 team. Start 12. So that's why the running back position is up there. So for me, I'm going to say this. I'll be valuing the running back position a little bit more in this league than I would in a normal league. But in particular, like, it's not just the position. That this is kind of showing me if I think there's a player, even if he's getting a little older, that has a chance to be a real difference maker. I'm going to put a little more of a premium on making sure that I get those on my contending teams in this league. The quarterback position here, because we're starting 12, right? And the way I think about it is this. Worp oftentimes kind of just highlights what I would think about a league, confirms my bias there. And but there's also times where it kind of shows me something different than my bias. But where it does confirm my bias, or I would say just like my prior thoughts on the matter, when we're in a 12-team Superflex league, right, the less starters overall, and it's Superflex, right? That means you can start 2 quarterbacks, and let's say it's a start 8 or a start 9. So in that format, there's 2 quarterbacks relative to 6 other skill players or 7 other skill players. So because the quarterbacks score more than all those other players in general, you only have 6 or 7 skill player spots to make up or try to catch up to the quarterback position. So that's where I think this line really makes sense, because as you start to get more skill players, more flex spots, right, into your league starting lineup, that's going to give you more opportunities to basically catch up, if you have an edge at those flex spots, to someone that has really high scoring quarterbacks, or just 2 better quarterbacks than you might have. What I'm seeing here is kind of what I would expect with the quarterback line. The really great ones, the Jalen Hurts of the world, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, the types that can, I would say, get to some level of, like, Patrick Mahomes is just a cheat code, right? Because he doesn't run the ball that much. His ground yardage is not really what's really propelling his stats. But the other guys that can do a lot on the ground, that's the Konami code. So those type of quarterbacks in this league still, even though we're starting 12, like, they're wildly different. But when you look at just in general for me, quarterback 12, still valuable, but under 2 in Worp. And once you get to like quarterback 18, it's basically you start seeing that line really continues to go down to where if you have like a weak quarterback 2, let's say, just because it's a quarterback, that's not actually helping you probably as much as you think if you have to sink a lot of dynasty value into that position. So like this is kind of the have or have nots at quarterback. So I'm kind of explaining to you why I'm seeing the line this way. I think why the scoring settings speak to it, and then kind of how I'm going to value an appropriate overall for the league as like kind of a baseline. And then we're going to get into kind of Zach Willard's team. But then the tight end position here is pretty interesting. When I look at the large majority of Worp charts for all different types of leagues, different formats or whatever, the tight end position pretty much always, similar to this, does trail all the higher scoring like positions, quarterback, running back, wide receiver. But when I'm looking at this one, the interesting part is this is one of those leagues where I will, because of the heavy tight end premium, if I can get a stud, I'm willing to go ahead and pay up or do what it's necessary to go get one of those type of players. So like the top 6 here, you're at 2 Worp, but when we get down to tight end 12, tight end 18, we're looking at 1.5, 1.25. It's still okay, but like basically I think one of the things to be cautious of here, the Worp line there doesn't actually mean anything other than relative to the tight end position. So I don't necessarily think that this line should speak to you that if you have extra tight ends, that it's the most optimal play at a flex spot. But I do think that if I can get, a difference maker at the tight end position because of how many points they're scoring per catch, I'm basically willing to go ahead and get one if I can, even if I have to pay up for it to get, the Kelseys, the Andrews, the Laporta, someone in that range. If I'm able to get it at a relatively close to market cost, cool. If not, I'm still okay kind of punting that position. That's the way I'm kind of viewing it with Worp. So then the next thing I'd like to do now is obviously, what are we working with here? Like, let's dig into the team. Let's dig into the league. So when you take a look at Zach Willard's team here, all right, in this 12 team, start 12. Stroud, I think he's overpriced in Dynasty, but I'm perfectly fine with him as your quarterback 1. Jahmyr Gibbs, running back 1. Javonte Williams at running back 2. Marvin Harrison, Devontae Smith, the Slim Reaper are his wide receiver 1 and 2 in this league. Mark Andrews, so he does have one of these what I would call Worp difference makers in this format. Got JSN would be his first flex. George Kittle. Now the way this works here on the lab is they're going to show you based on ADP's value, right? So in Dynasty, ADP it's kind of just organizing them this way. So you don't have to necessarily start it like this, and Zach may not be. But JSN, George Kittle, Christian Watson, Aaron Jones, Hollywood Brown. Unfortunately, Andrews J.J. McCarthy out for the season. Does have Sam Darnold, so he's got the Viking starter. Then he has Mac Jones, Desmond Ridder, Zach Wilson, Stetson Bennett, Keaton Mitchell, Khalil Herbert, Frank Gore. We got Jalen McMillan, Demario Douglas, Tyler Boyd, A.T. Perry, Rondale Moore, Zay Jones, Kadarius Toney, Michael Gallup, Tyler Higbee, Logan Thomas. We get into the picks here. He has 3 extra for us in 2025. He's down his second, but he has his first and third. He does have all of his 26 picks and 27 picks as well. Okay, so the way I'm looking at this, now go back to Worp, right? One of the things I like to do is kind of look at the roster construction tab. Now, it even says on here to take them with a grain of salt, and I would. I look at it overall, kind of what it's telling me. I may slightly change things depending on what the league format is and kind of what I'm seeing with the scoring. And essentially what the market will do is not really put into play here for the Worp tool. It doesn't have anything to do with market. It doesn't associate like market values into this. The Worp tool is saying the optimal roster construction is 3.5 quarterbacks. So, 3 to 4 would be what that means. 5.67 running backs, 2.67 rookies. You can kind of disregard that because that line is just trying to show you that rookies in their rookie season are unlikely to score really significant meaning amount of points. Then you have wide receivers, 7.75. The droppable number here is one that I think is very interesting and keep in mind, but 3.75 tight ends, and like I said, basically 8 wide receivers, the tab says, but the 7.33 droppable. So with 30 roster spots, they're basically saying 7 to 8 should be guys that like you're basically at a moment's notice, not putting so much dynasty value into that. If they're not doing anything for you, you need to be willing to move on from those guys, because on the waiver wire, there probably is going to be some people that you should be picking up. So when I look at that, I'm definitely going to change the way that I value stuff and the way that I want to roster construct. And the droppable number, basically, knowing that's the same, basically, I'm going to start putting those 7 into other spots. Now, the way I'm going to be doing it in this league is very similar. I'm going to probably want to have 8 wide receivers. 7 would be fine if that's 7 really good, solid receivers that are worth starting when they're healthy and on the field. And then, I'd say 3 to 4 tight ends, but I'd probably lean more towards 3. Then I'm basically going to put all those other droppable numbers. Like I want to have those of my roster construction into the running back and the quarterback position. And I'll kind of walk through why here. But when we're taking a look at this team, right? So we got, of his starters, Javonte Williams is I would say the one concerning one. Everybody else here, week 1, literally no problem starting. And let's take a look at his bench though, okay? Because it's not like his starting roster is in a bad spot. I'm going to address a few things here. But when we take a look at his bench, right? So Mac Jones, Desmond Ridder, Zach Wilson, Stetson Bennett. These are guys that's kind of like all these quarterbacks that I would like to roster. It's essentially, if there's an injury to Trevor Lawrence, is Mac Jones going to be the starter? I would say the answer is probably yes to that. And if that's the case, basically, if you look at a quarterback room and you say that they're the number 2 clear and away option on the team, or it's even, let's say it's a close call, and they do have a very good chance though. Okay, those are going to be quarterbacks that I want to roster. And I want to have as many of those as possible, because if any of these guys have an injury, I mean, J.J. McCarthy's actually an interesting one. I don't think he was going to be the starter guaranteed out of week 1, dealing with injuries beforehand. But if there's an injury to the quarterback position and you have the backup, right, and they are now going to be the starter, let's say it's for even a few weeks or it's all the way up to the full season, that's a massive boost in value. And especially seeing the Worp chart here, like those quarterbacks that are way down the line, I probably don't value too much. I don't want to be having to start them week in and week out based on what the Worp is saying on this league. But I think in most formats, you're going to be able to now sell them for something. Even if it's a later pick, now you can flip that basically backup quarterback that probably was sitting on the waivers for something of consequence. So I'm fine with all those quarterbacks. I think all of them should actually be the starter based on what I'm looking at currently on the depth charts. So then we take a look at his running back position. Okay, he's got Keaton Mitchell, Khalil Herbert, Frank Gore Jr. Jalen McMillan is now we're at wide receiver. So the running back room, I would say for you right now, Zach, if you're watching this, it's thin. Like it's real thin, honestly. Like you're not going to be able to fix this overnight. But you got Aaron Jones as your running back. I would say you're running back 2, right? So let's go Jahmyr Gibbs running back 1, Aaron Jones running back 2, Javonte Williams running back 3. But then after that, Keaton Mitchell, I wouldn't be banking on him really for anything out of the gates. Khalil Herbert, I think, may have a role, but we don't even know that for sure. And then Frank Gore Jr., and then you're done. So just think about it from this perspective, I guess, the way that I like to roster construct, especially if you have like a hero RB, or let's say you didn't have Jahmyr Gibbs, but you just had, another solid running back there. Let's call it I don't know, Josh Jacobs, whatever. If there's an injury to Jahmyr Gibbs or Jacobs, or I don't know, even if it was Aaron Jones, like right now you don't even have a true starter to get into your lineup. But also, like right now, you're currently not roster constructing around the running back position with volume, so that when all these, attrition happens to the position, you have a lot of lottery tickets of guys that'll just be, starters or chances to be the starter because of an injury. So like right now, this would not be the way I would like to roster construct. Number one, I would probably prefer to have a lot more than these amount of running backs. When I'm looking at your roster construction, I'm looking at their wide receiver position now, right? To round it out. Demario Douglas, Tyler Boyd, I'm definitely good with those. A.T. Perry seems to be a sleeper for a lot of people. You can kind of see what happens, but like once I start getting to Rondale Moore, Zay Jones, Kadarius Toney, Michael Gallup, like, I mean, honestly, all of these guys can go for me. What is the likelihood that any of these players, like just because we're starting 12, like what is the likelihood for any of those players that you feel confident starting them weekly? I would say a lot has to happen and change from what we currently think about in fantasy for them to be starters for you. So to me, those are the type of guys that I'm willing to kind of, flush down the toilet, get off my roster. If I can put them on like a auto accept trade block, taking any fourth, taking any fifth, if I can get anything, even fab money, that's cool. I'll take that. And then the whole idea is though to free these roster spots so I can now kind of backfill and get running backs on my team in for those players. So that's the way I'm looking at it here. The tight end position, Tyler Higbee and Logan Thomas on the bench with your starter of Mark Andrews. Honestly, I think like when I'm looking at it, that roster construction is fine. Anyway, when I'm looking at the roster construction overall, kind of like what my eye saw fitting actually met up with the Worp tool pretty well, hand in hand. I do a lot of these, so a lot of times it ends up being the case as long as it's not too super crazy scoring formats and settings, and this is not. So again, I wanted to have about 7 to 8 receivers on this team. So when I look at it, Zach, what I'm looking at, right, when I start counting through them, you got Marvin Harrison Jr., Devontae Smith, Jackson Smith and Jigba. We got Christian Watson, Hollywood Brown would be 5, 6, 7 would be Demario Douglas and Tyler Boyd. I feel like you want to put McMillan in there as your 8th. That's definitely about good. Like I'm good at 8 right there. Like that's where A.T. Perry for me, I know he's a sleeper for a lot of people, but my roster construction, he would probably be someone I'm looking to either move, or if you really want to keep him, can I move Demario Douglas or Tyler Boyd or Jalen McMillan for something more valuable than I can move, A.T. Perry and then slide him into my roster construction. For me, he would not be meeting. But the point is, that's kind of where I'm looking at your roster construction and where I want to fix it, or the way I want to go ahead and do it. If you're asking for my opinion and you want to roster construct or kind of build your teams like I would, and the reasons why, that would be it, right? So that basically means to me, if you count A.T. Perry, you're talking about 5 roster spots right there. Definitely would be 4 at minimum if you decide to keep A.T. Perry and go heavy at the receiver position. But that at least free up some spots where, now I don't know right now currently today if there's like running backs on your waiver wire, but what I would be looking at is, are there running backs on the wire that currently project on the depth chart, or that you think, with what we know today anyway, are going to be, just an injury away from getting a very sizable workload increase? And now with that running back, you have a chance to start him. I'm looking for that, or quarterbacks that would be clearly the number 2 QB on their team. Now, when we take a look and kind of compare your team to the league now, right? So I'm looking at the teams in the league. The lab actually says here, right, you are the 4th as far as Dynasty total value, and that's based on ADP values. You kind of count that, saying you're the 4th team here, so you're very much in the mix of contention. Now, when you go to redraft total, more like the 6th team. When we go to redraft starters, again, the 6th team. So I think this team, at least from what I'm viewing, should be a team that you're thinking about competing with. You do have your picks and flexibility. If something was to go, a little awry, you're all right, and you can, kind of rebuild, retool for next season. But right now, the way I'm looking at this team, anyway, I'm looking at it as this is a team that definitely is in the contending mix. Is it the best team in the league? Maybe not, but you're right there and in the mix with some of these other teams. Now, what I would say is, when I look at your squad overall, and just creative ways I think you can potentially think about, not just roster construction there, right? But how can I improve the players on this team? Or basically, I wouldn't even say it's all about just the players. Obviously, that's what we're starting week in and week out. But like, how can I improve, a few craftful moves, or just thinking about dynasty value, reshaping this team? Is there any type of way that I can make this roster with the dynasty value based on a few moves totally different? So I look at, okay, where are your pockets of really significant value on this team currently? Well, CJ Stroud, I think right now absolutely is massively valuable in Dynasty. I mean, when I look at your team, I would imagine in the large majority of startups, I would say almost everyone, undebatably, he's going to be the first guy off the board. So, like, he is significantly valuable. Now, when we go back to, again, the multi-year Worp, CJ Stroud probably, even if he's, on the lower end of what we expect this year, probably still worth having him on your team. And I'm not, obviously that's not even a discussion, but is he somebody that you can trade for a tier down and get similar ranges of outcomes? Like, could you tier down CJ Stroud to a guy like, Kyler Murray, or there's all kinds of different players that you could go to a Dak Prescott, something like that. That would be something I think that in a start 12, right, where I have to get that many starters, I think the big thing to note is I'm a lot more willing to, in a league format like this, kind of tier down because those starters are their fringe players. Like Hollywood Brown, actually on your team already, he's a perfect example for me. Like in a start 9 league, optimally the way I want to build, I'm not really looking to start him on a weekly basis in a start 9. Now, if I had to flex him, I would do it. But the way I'm looking to kind of build my team, I'd rather have a guy in my flex spot that is probably more has better dynasty value than Hollywood Brown, but certainly on a weekly basis, I think projects probably to be more safe and probably a little bit higher upside than does Hollywood Brown. So, but in a start 12 like this, these guys are highly valuable because once we start getting to bye weeks and there's attrition, I already look at your bench, right? When we take a look at your bench, currently today you have Keaton Mitchell, Khalil Herbert, Frank Gore, Jalen McMillan, Demario Douglas, Tyler Boyd, and we talked about those other receivers you want to cut. Like, I'm looking right now, let's say tomorrow, week 2, week 3, whatever it would be. Yeah, you could probably start Pop Douglas. I don't know if you feel great about it, but you definitely could. I mean, there's just not someone on this list that I immediately think of like, yeah, he's someone I feel great about starting already. And you just look at across the teams in the league, you'll see similar things. So the point is, if you have more players like Hollywood Brown to fill in the rosters, your roster spots during bye weeks, and as attrition happens, like you already had, unfortunately, a big whack with JJ McCarthy. So those are the things I think I'm looking at immediately already is, can I tier down where I get a quarterback, maybe not CJ Stroud level, but can I get back a guy that's going to have actually similar ranges of outcomes, even if it's a little lower, a Jared Goff type, but I'm getting back a significant plus. Those are the things I'm probably looking to do in this format, if at all possible. So Jahmyr Gibbs, I love Jahmyr Gibbs. I have him in the Fade the Fetal League. I have him in quite a bit of Dynasty Leagues, but he would be another player that in this format, I'm looking to potentially tier down if I can stay in certain ranges. Again, if you go back to the Worp chart, you can see around like running back 18. So those top 18, 24 running backs still very, very valuable. Not saying the other ones aren't worth rostering, but there is a big difference between, Jahmyr Gibbs is probably like a top 5, 6 range of outcomes we expect this year versus a top 12. Like if I can tier down and get another player that's going to be either a solid running back or a solid wide receiver, that would be in this format something I'd be willing to do. So I'm looking at kind of stuff like that. There's a lot of dynasty value that you have kind of tied up in like guys like Marv, Devontae Smith, Jahmyr Gibbs, CJ Stroud especially. So I think I would start there and kind of see if you're able to. And I don't know, he didn't give me any of this yet, but what I would do when I'm asking you guys if you wanted to do team reviews, kind of give me some things in the league discussions. Like, have you had discussions with your league mates, offers, counters back and forth? Some of the players that you think, this league mate likes and vice versa. What players are you trying to go get, or are you just wanting me to give you ideas as far as that goes? So I think when I look at this, that's where I'm starting. Like, can I kind of tier down in a start 12? I'm going to be a little more aggressive in the type of tier downs I'm willing to take. I think another thing to keep in mind is definitely draft capital. Like if it's a first round pick in this type of a league format with start 12, the variance I think can be a lot higher just because if a team's not roster constructed correctly, even if they look very good, they are 2 significant injuries away from like, oh shit, this team is literally not even in playoff contention. So I would even be willing to take on picks a lot of times in this tier down approach as well. Normally what I would do here, if this was an actual full team review, is this is where I would start going over all your different league mates and kind of seeing what they might need, as well as like for what I see visually, as well as what you may be able to give me with what they view their team and how they look at their team. Kind of give you some different trade ideas and targets, combinations, and then ultimately kind of what you're looking to do. So anyway, that's really all I got on it. And again, when I'm taking a look at a team review or portfolio review, some of the differences really in those, as far as the details go, kind of lie in the actual players that you have on the team. Some of those players versus a portfolio review where I'm looking a lot more at roster construction and then overall what are the differences in your scoring formats from league to league and kind of highlighting those across all of your portfolio. So I would just say that right now, if you are interested in that, make sure you let us know down in the comments if you want to get on a team review with us down in the future. These are something for me I really love doing. And I think whether you're on the call or not, once I have a little more information on the league from you, there's a lot of things I can do as far as kind of figuring out like what your league mates are wanting or doing with their teams and kind of appropriately finding trade partners for you, as well as really good targets, I think. And then ultimately, sometimes you need someone to kind of tell you, either confirm your bias or like, do I need to move CJ Stroud? I'm going to say, yeah, you probably should. Or on the flip side, a player maybe you hadn't been thinking about, or, you know, types of players on your team, like you have too many wide receivers on this team. Basically, overall, just making sure that you're setting your teams up with as much chance to win as possible through roster construction. Obviously, there's just going to be so much variance that happens that's out of your control, but over here at BDGE, we're going to try to get all of your teams ready to go and win titles in your league. That's ultimately what we're here for. So not to mention have a little fun, fuck around while we're here. If you want any of that, let us know down in the comments. Let me know what you thought of this portfolio and team review discussion. So that's the first one, Zach. Zach gave me permission to use this on content, so I wanted to try to find a way to actually do that, at least for one of the leagues, to kind of show you, I think, all the different things that you can think about. Like, I went over this a little more generically for the content. I'm going to get a little more into the weeds with each single team review that you have if you'd like to do that. But I'll see you back here, same time, same place, next week, talking more Dynasty strategy, trades, league reviews, all that sheesh. I'm out of here. Peace.